everybody. Hello. Wow, it's so bright up here. Welcome to tonight's talk. So this is a conversation about the future of pot with Marc Emery. And before we bring Marc out, I just have to say a couple things. First, I'd like to acknowledge that this talk is being held on unceded Musqueam territory. The other thing I'd like to do is thank the AMS, which is UBC's student society, for putting on this talk. With the AMS, my radio show, the Terry Project on CiTR, puts on events sort of like this. They're in less intimidating and bright rooms usually, and there's beer involved, but those are called Bar Talk. You can look up more information on that at ams.ubc.ca or terry.ubc.ca. And I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Sam Fenn, and I'm a radio journalist in Vancouver and here at UBC. And I guess I got asked to do this today because I made a documentary series called The Four Pillars Revisited, which is about drug policy in Vancouver. And my master's thesis is also on marijuana policy and drug policy in Vancouver, which means that some of my questions are kind of super wonky, and I'll try not to spend an interminable amount of time on like the details. And the last thing to say is just that this is the first public talk that Marc Emery is giving since being released from prison. And so I hope you all join me in giving him a round of applause and bring him out here. Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great. So, and just to give you a sense of the format, I'm going to be asking Marc some questions for, 45 minutes or something. Then we are going to throw these house lights up and have you guys just sort of informally shout out questions. So, but first, you've been a free man for 6 months approximately. Is that right?
5 months, yeah.
How does it feel?
Well, I should say it feels great, and it does feel great. Everything feels good, but I felt really great before I went to prison, too. And the reason being is because I've had an entire life where I've had a mission, and it's been a wonderful mission, and I'm seeing it come to fruition. And it didn't just happen recently. It's been coming to fruition for 10, 15, 20 years. And I'm extremely proud of what Vancouver's become and how it's become that way and how many people have pitched in and how I believe in the 1990s I kickstarted a lot of what's happened today that's taken place with hundreds of people. And we've got, I hate to say it, but I don't hate to say it, we've got a great police department. Vancouver Police needs to be congratulated for letting legalization happen in Vancouver in a way that I think is more actual legalization than they have anywhere else in the world, anywhere. I think we have a tremendous situation here, 60 dispensaries that admit virtually everybody. Marijuana is cheaper here in Vancouver than it is in any other place in the Western world and in the English-speaking world. We have had no violence associated with this marijuana trade that's going on in Vancouver for a long, long time. And we have mayors and city councilors that fully endorse what we're doing. And we've been protected by the police and by the city hall and by great activists like Dana Larson and Evan Wood have stopped the violence. We've been protected from everything the conservatives have wanted to do to the cannabis culture. Vancouver has been made immune by all these people coming together over the last 20 years and creating this golden age that we're going through right now. I came back in time to really enjoy it and appreciate it and try and do something even cutting edge within it.
A golden age.
Yeah, this is it, because everything, all the activists have worked for, David Mamalavoon, Dana Larson, everybody who started out a Compassion Club in the 90s, everything, it's come to this, where we've got the most legal environment anywhere in the world for marijuana in Vancouver. Now, very specifically only Vancouver. I'd caution people not to consider Vancouver like the rest of Canada or vice versa. But if you define legalization as two things, no one gets arrested for growing marijuana, selling marijuana, possessing marijuana, and smoking marijuana is not illegal anyway, but nobody gets arrested for those 3 criminal code violations, and anybody can grow their own. People might say, well, we can't grow our own, but we can in Vancouver, because since I've been home, there hasn't been a single arrest of any grower in 5 months. There hasn't been a single arrest of any seller, of anybody possessing marijuana, of anybody running a lounge, of anybody running a dispensary. I mean, there's no other jurisdiction like that that I'm aware of in Canada. And so we have this very, very fortunate situation that we can look on as the culmination of about 25 years of really great work by a wide variety of people, which I'm really happy to be amongst them.
So that's the present, and we're going to talk about the future. But first, if you don't mind, let's go way back into the past. You were 17 in 1975, and you decided to drop out of high school and open a bookstore called City Lights. Why did you decide to drop out of high school?
Oh, I love books, I love print, and I also thought it was a great place to be part of history, because as a bookshop, I knew with my personality I would have the ability to pursue political things that would appeal to me. Plus, I've been in business. My first business was when I was 9 years old. It was a vintage stamp business, and at 11 I moved into a comic book business that was incredibly successful. And
profitable business?
By the time I was 14, I was making more than my father, and he didn't really understand what I was doing in this business. I was selling old vintage comic books. And when I was in 1974, 15, I asked him, I said, Dad, how much do you make every week? And he said, I make $402 at this factory he worked at all his life, 3M. And I said, wow, I made more than you this week. I made $440. And that's my first lesson in learning to shut up, is what I should have learned, because my father from that moment charged me $40 a week room and board. And he said he didn't.
How old were you when he did this?
15. And he said he didn't particularly need the money, but when he was my age, he said all my money went to support my family.
What did your parents think of you dropping out of school?
Well, they fought about it for 3 days. It was the most argumentative situation I'd ever seen in my family up till then. My mother was totally opposed to letting me quit school. She said she wanted me to go to Harvard. I've never heard that until that argument. And my father said, well, if we don't let him do this when he really, really wants to, I'm afraid he'll always have this against us, that we stopped him from doing something that was really important to him. And that was pretty daring, because my father grew up with just a grade 8 education, went through the Depression and World War II, and it sacrificed tremendously to raise my brothers and sisters and myself in the 1960s, working at a factory and bringing us up in a family of lots of love. You know, it's funny, when I was young, every person in kindergarten with me had 2 parents at home. There were no divorced families, there were no single family parents, and that was really an ideal environment to grow up. Nobody had any money, interestingly enough, in that era. Now everybody has money. But everybody had 2 parents and a real strong community sense that everybody was in this together. Everybody knew everybody else in the community. And I grew up with a lot of love, which has allowed me to endure the 28 arrests I've had for marijuana alone and 23 jailings, and an accumulation of about 5.5 years spent in prison overall for a variety of marijuana-related offenses.
So let's get to that. So some of your first political campaigns, you fought the London Downtown Business Association, their beautification program. You rallied against a ban on commerce on Sundays in Ontario, I believe, is province-wide, right? You sold contraband, pornography, and marijuana literature. And you played 2 Live Crew. Did you sell, or did you play 2 Live Crews, nasty as they want to be?
I played on my radio show at the local college radio station, but I did sell several hundred copies, and then was later arrested that day.
So can you talk to me about these early causes? I mean, what was offensive to you personally about these governmental restrictions?
Well, in the early days, everything was offensive to me. I mean, I'd read Ayn Rand in October 1979, and that, to this day, is still the most profound moment in my life.
Which book?
The second, Atlas Shrugged and The Fountain. But the second most profound thing was the day I finally got high smoking marijuana when I was 22, which was the following year in 1980. But when I read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, I said, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. I want to be the person that basically smashes the state. Now, and brings about an era of justice and goodness and all these, incredibly lofty sensibility I had after reading one book, but books will do that to you. People get inspired. And I was inspired by these books, and I don't regret any of that. I've had a wonderful life, 35 years ever since then, of pursuing issues of justice, of individualism, and trying to rein in government, which of course is always really our enemy in the long term. Our people are not our enemy. I have a lot of confidence in people and Canadians, in the value of humans to reasonably negotiate anything with each other and get through all conflicts. But I have no confidence of the governments ability to do that. So all my life I've been picking up where individuals are being oppressed or where we're being censored or where our legitimate rights are being curtailed. I wanted to be involved in that. So I actively banned rap records and got charged and went to court and lost, by the way. And then I pursued the Sunday shopping. We opened our store on Sunday and got charged many times and lost in court. But the laws were both changed in those cases. The public hue and cry event developed, and people said, listen, everybody wants to shop on Sunday. It's ridiculous. What is this law, these prohibitions you have? And prohibitions are the easiest laws to fight in a way, like prohibition against abortion, prohibition against Sunday shopping, prohibition against reading or music, prohibition against marijuana, because that's a clear black and white thing. You can say, I'm opposed to this and I want to change it. Most laws are more nuanced than that. They don't.
Did you know right away that you wanted to use, civil disobedience as your tactic for going against these restrictions?
This day and back in 1979, have the same feeling. I want to use everything that's possible. So civil disobedience where necessary, the political process where necessary, letters to the editor, media. Back in the old days, there was so little media. Now we have the advantage of social media. And I think the marijuana legalization movement has probably benefited more by Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and all the social media, the internet itself, than any other group.
Now, some of these issues, if you think about them, the beautification program, maybe less so, but the no commerce on Sundays, I mean, that was certainly something that local older Christian people probably were in favor of. Then Two Live Crew, I mean, you can imagine the sort of person who doesn't want Two Live Crew's music played, marijuana literature, pornography, same basic thing. I mean, were you starting to envision a political enemy? Did you have an adversary in mind at this time?
Just the government. The government was, I always saw, and to this day is responsible for a lot of the injustice we see about there. The amount of evil one person can put out into the world, to me, is greatly diminished by comparison with the evil that government puts out routinely every day. And so I thought, I wanted to be kind of like a ombudsman for the ordinary, everyday citizen, and who wants to buy that Two Live Crew album if it's or who wants to shop on Sunday, or who wants to be able to access marijuana without punishment, or who wants to have an abortion. I was very active in the pro-choice and abortion movement for years until Henry Morgentaler, using civil disobedience, basically ended the prohibition on abortion in Canada too. So there's a great tradition in Canada of people using civil disobedience and quite effectively to bring about change. And that's all I want to do. I've never really thought of someone as enemy. The government's the enemy, and they're always the enemy, and we'll always have to fight them, and we'll always be stuck with government. And this is the job of every citizen, is to oppose his government wherever possible and try and make change towards a greater society, more justice, more individualism, more respect for our individual rights, not our so-called collective rights.
Well, yeah, so that brings up a good point, which is that looking at your career, it seems as if where you've been an articulate champion of the overstepping that the government's done to infringe on personal rights, you haven't always spoken as loudly about inequality or market forces that create inequality. Why do you think that is?
Well, because inequality is built into the human condition. We're all unequal. No one has the same car, the same house, the same intelligence, the same. The only place we really want to be equal is before the law. We want to be treated fairly before an impartial arbiter. But we're all grotesquely dissimilar to each other when it comes to talents and abilities. And I mean, some people are born rich. I mean, some people are born poor. I mean, we all have our crosses to bear. Some people are good looking. I mean, that's the biggest advantage you can get in this society. And some people are born homely. I mean, but also you meet rich, handsome people who are not doing well, and they're struggling and suffering, and even at times killing themselves. So despair affects even those we think are blessed and privileged. One thing I've noticed is everybody seems to think they have a unique monopoly on pain, and in my experience, everybody suffers. Everybody has a moment. Either they suffer a lot or they suffer selectively, but we all have a cross to bear. We've all got something where we've suffered in our past. So it's never a great idea to be holier than thou and presume you've suffered more than me. People often give me credit for going to jail for 5 years and think that I suffered there. But, I meet people who are crippled up all the time. That's why they use cannabis. And people who have just misfortune in their lives. I feel blessed to have gone to jail for 5 years in comparison with them. I'm so grateful to have everything that I've got now and had when I was in jail.
Yeah. You know, when you think of the marijuana legalization movement, the stereotype anyway is that a lot of the people involved subscribe to a kind of loose socialism, maybe a way of putting it. Is it ever an uneasy alliance? Are people surprised to hear that you are a fan of objectivist literature?
Well, they always, I think I get a fair shake from the media and people, but they can easily try and use that as a prejudice against you. Oh, you're influenced by Ayn Rand. A new movie that was out about me, Citizen Mark, tried to make that connection that I was less credible because I had a philosophical kinship to Ayn Rand. But really, one of the things Ayn Rand taught me, and that is really important for our movement, is that when I came here to British Columbia in the early 90s, there was a very socialist, rainbow gathering type of ethos to the movement, and that I thought was greatly flawed. I said the one thing we need to do is we need to all learn to become good business people. We need to understand the value of money, the importance of money in pursuing liberty, and we need to make sure we use that money to enrich our own people. So instead of enriching, going to jail as victims, let's go to jail as martyrs. Instead of earning money discreetly and on the side and pretending like we're not doing it, let's get right out there and tell people we want to make money in this marijuana industry. Let's do that. So now we have, I'd say, thousands and thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs in Canada alone that are developing vaporizers, developing various accoutrements of the marijuana culture, are opening businesses, grow shops, seed shops, bong shops, dispensaries. People by the thousands have embraced that idea. Let's not put down money. Let's get in on the money so we can do things with that money. Everything I did was because I was able to earn money. We gave $5 million away that eventually gets me into trouble with the DEA, but that $5 million was very specifically raised by selling seeds to be given away for ballot initiatives and class action suits and all the different things we did around the world that were so awesome. It was because of a capitalist ethos that Ayn Rand gave to me. Now, how you use money or how you use that kind of ability is very much up to the individual. Some people like to keep all their money. I enjoyed giving it all away. I found a great deal of satisfaction. That's what I wanted to do, and I had a political objective in mind, and earning a lot of money for me to give away served as a good example for so many others. And I'd say that some of my most dearest acolytes have done that. Dana Larson's a great example with Sensible BC of using money that he's earned in a great way to put the movement forward. David Malmo Levine, lots of people have done this. Right?
The actual pot smokers themselves, though, are they ever surprised to hear that you're a libertarian?
Well, mostly politics doesn't come up with people. Mm-hmm. And our problem as a movement is that our people don't vote anyway, and that they're not very philosophically inclined, and so there's a real problem there that I want to address this year. Right. When I go across the country in September and October, I think it's vitally important we all try and bring a liberal majority. And I meet people that are cynical. A lot of our people have not voted. A lot of young people haven't voted. A lot of university students haven't voted. And they are cynical and they don't see any value to it. But, we have a historical opportunity here, not only to get rid of the Harper government, which a lot of Canadians like me are unhappy with and want to get rid of, but we have an opportunity to embrace a party just this one time where every candidate, all 338 of them, all the Liberal candidates are going to say, I support legalizing marijuana. The leader is going to say, I'm going to support legalizing marijuana. It's on their platform. It's on their website. It's part of their campaign. And they have the greatest chance of any party to become the next government. So
okay, so let's come back to the Liberals and put a pin in the macroeconomic bullshit that I brought up. You smoked pot for the first time, you say, when you're 22?
On December 21st, 1980, yeah.
Yeah, and what was that experience? I mean, why can you rattle that date off? That's insane.
Because that's the day I fell in love with a woman named Sandra Chrysler, and just before we were about to have sex, I noticed that she was licking something sealed shut, and so she said, and I was going to go down and do something, and she said, before you do that, let's smoke this.
Yeah.
And that...
I'm never going to get to moderate a UBC talk again.
So to this day, I've had very positive associations with cannabis and sex, and cannabis and romance, and cannabis and other people. It was really the perfect time for me to first get high.
Was pot politically on your radar at that time?
It would be another almost 10 years before I brought it up. I brought up many things, including the Sunday shopping, the Two Live Crew. I thought cannabis legalization itself back in those days was so unpopular. It was only polling about 15% support in the 1980s. But what happened is in 1990, I had a radio show at a radio station, and I used to play a lot of Dead Kennedys and Jello Biafra, any kind of song. I used to have a radio show called Radio Free Speech Revolution Through Rock and Rap, and I would play all these music that would be anti-government music or pro-freedom music, right? And certainly pro-pot music. And then I learned these spoken word albums by Jello Biafra, the former lead man for the Dead Kennedys, and they were awesome. And he had a segment called Grow More Pot, where he talked about this book by Jack Herrera called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. Well, I went to get that book, and bookstores told me it was banned in Canada. And I'd never heard, I thought banning books was completely alien to our culture, that no book had ever been banned in Canada. And then I found out that all books about marijuana were banned. Like, I was stunned. All High Times hadn't been allowed in the country. Now, as a bookseller, I was very offended by that, and I said, well, that's that. I'm going to start importing all these banned books and selling them, and I'm going to try and get charged by the police, because that had worked for me in the past with Sunday shopping. And it took us 4 years before we got charged, and eventually, we don't get charged for selling Grow books or High Times. We get charged when in Toronto, or in York actually, north of Toronto, the police put in an undercover female officer in a high school and proceeded to ask all the male students if they could sell her weed. And when 52 of them did, they charged 52 students with trafficking. And to me, this was just a horrible, terrible thing to do to young people, criminalize them. So we went to that school and started handing out brochures that basically said, know your rights. And the police arrested us for distributing illicit drug literature, and that's how we got it struck down in court.
And at this point, is it just sort of one facet of your politics?
What do you mean?
What I mean is sort of shortly after, when you're starting to bring in the banned marijuana literature, and you're starting to think of this as a political issue, is it kind of on the radar with other issues of censorship and government incursion into the free market, or is it starting to take over your politics?
Well, when I start selling the books about marijuana, the first thing I do is I read that book by Jack Herrera, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and then I'm thunderstruck with what's in that.
What's in it?
Well, it tells you the secret history, how the U.S. government suppressed cannabis, how they've suppressed the cannabis people, how, in fact, America had cannabis in its history for centuries and centuries. And Canada, and then you read the Canadian history, which I'm thankful for Dana Larson. One of the first things I read once I came to British Columbia was his history of cannabis prohibition in Canada. And that told me that cannabis had been planted here in the 1600s by Samuel de Champlain. We grew hemp for hundreds of years, which is cannabis. We had it all over the country. We even had some wonderful factories like in New Westminster, the New Westminster cordage and hemp factory. They used to make endless amounts of rope for sea-bearing ships, and it was just amazing stuff. So I kept reading this, and I'm thinking, we've really been lied to in a big way. I mean, it's one thing to defend the right to pornography, but there's no secret conspiracy there. Here we have a history of hundreds of years of hemp, hundreds of years of cannabis, millions of Canadians who smoke it, and they're all in the dark. All their literature is banned. There's nothing else like that. No other culture had been clearly targeted for ostracization in Canada since World War II, when they round up Jehovah's Witnesses and others who were against the war. I saw this as a very long-term strategy by the government to suppress us, to oppress us, to marginalize us. And those initial books I read that were banned told me that I was onto something really big and that I should just not let this go and stop all other campaigns. And I really haven't campaigned about anything other than marijuana legalization for 25 years.
Back in that moment, before you moved to Vancouver, did you see marijuana as a politically winnable issue?
Well, at 16%, which is what we were at in 1992, it wasn't winnable. And in fact, it wasn't even discussed. The only newspaper articles in the 1980s that you ever saw about marijuana were never about anything to do with medical marijuana. That had never been brought up before. It wasn't about anything good about pot. It was all about bus, how many bus were, how to look for bus. It was like the police controlled the entire landscape. And that finally changed when I came back to British Columbia, and there was no movement then. When I talk to young people and tell them that, 25 years ago, there were no bongs and pipes, there were no shops, there were no books and magazines, everything was illegal, everything was prohibited, nothing was permitted, and the media never discussed it. And in the era before the internet, that was a total blackout. So pot people did smoke and hide, just like the Peter Tosh song. They had a few friends, but you'd be afraid to tell most people you smoked pot. Now nobody's afraid to tell anybody they smoke pot. because everything's changed. We are the majority in the political landscape. There's millions of us smoking marijuana. We're all hooked up with each other, integrated into our media, so we can't be alone anymore. Even in the most isolated place on earth, that person's got friends. That person who smokes pot in some island in the middle of nowhere has people who know what happens to him if he gets arrested. He can tell people, and all over the world people will know that person's been arrested. Things can happen when you have that knowledge and that kind of exchange of information, which really didn't exist until very recently, and now we're reaping the harvest of that because we're making rapid progress. There's more progress in a month than there was 25 years ago in a decade.
How did you decide to move to Vancouver?
I actually got kind of pouty. I'd been doing this civil disobedience for a number of years, 12 years, and going to jail for a variety of causes. And eventually, I just figured I had a bad moment. I felt it was kind of futile. And my partner at the time wanted to do something different. So I said, "What do you want to do?" And she said, "I'd like to go live in Asia." So I literally packed everything up, sold my house, sold my businesses, sold everything. It was a crazy idea, really. And then we moved to Asia for 2 years, and I ended up building a house on the side of some volcano crater lake and started acting like the guy from Mosquito Coast, ranting at visitors about the decadence of the Western world and stuff like that in the middle of the jungle.
Right.
And becoming not so much unglued, but a little unfastened as to, where my role was. 'Cause what I was doing is I was denying what I should be doing. I should be back, and even if it's difficult and challenging, I knew I should be back in Canada doing what I can do best with my capabilities, not languishing in some jungle place, raving on. But I did formulate my strategy for a retail revolution, that I call it, hemp retail revolution. In the jungle, after a couple of years of formulating thoughts, when I finally did something stupid like build a house I shouldn't be building and use up all my money there, and I never got to stay a day in that house. I built a house, this gorgeous chalet with a work crew of 20 for 4 months, spent $30,000, all my savings, and the idea being I would be living there for 6 years, and at the end of 6 years, the people who owned the property, because you had to make partners or something, would get the house for free. Well, the day I finished it, they just didn't want to wait 6 years and just took it away from me and started renting it to wealthy tourists right away, and I never spent a day there. But the consequence of that is I was now broke and without a place to stay. So after 4 hours of crying, sitting in a street in Singapore, I said, fine, we're going to go back to Vancouver and we'll start that hemp revolution I was telling you about. And they said, really? And I said, yeah, let's go get an airplane ticket now and go back home to Canada. And so that's when it was that explicit, let's go start a hemp revolution. Yeah, because I really had no money, no thing. When I first arrived in British Columbia on March 1st, 1994, I got a shipment of High Times and some grow books called Grow Your Own Stone, and I sold them door to door on the street. And eventually, after 3-4 months of that, I had enough money to put $500 down on a location on West Hastings to start Hemp BC, which is really the forerunner of the cannabis culture.
What was the marijuana culture like at the time in Vancouver?
Well, it was waiting to come out. It was waiting to come out. When we started having our 420, that started with us in 1995, celebrating April 20th. And so many things happened basically on a dare. 2 employees came up to me who were deadheads, and I first heard them say, 420, smoke them if you got them, for the first time in July 1994 when I first opened our shop, and I'd never heard that before. I lived in Ontario smoking pot for the previous 12 years or Asia, and I'd never heard anybody say anything about 420. So I learned about that, and then they came up to me one day and they said, Mark, do you think it would be all right if we celebrated 420 on 420? And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, let's go to the park and have some music and celebration and make that April 20th a holiday. And I said, well, what will we do? And they said, well, we'll just smoke pot all day and entertain ourselves. And I said, you mean we just smoke pot for a whole day in a park and like that? And they said, yeah. And I said, but that's so decadent. I said, because it's the Ayn Rand coming out there.
Did you say it was so decadent?
I said it was so decadent. I said, I don't get it. How will we get, will we get away with that? And they said, yeah, I think so. And then I said, no, we can't do that. That's just too, we just can't smoke pot all day, right? But they said, yeah, we could. And I said, so no. So then they came back half an hour later and they said, well, even if you don't approve, can we do it anyway? And I said, and I thought about that. I said, I admire initiatives. Yes, you can do that. So half an hour later, they're all excited. They say, well, listen, if we do it, will you help pay for it, right? And I said, okay, I'll help pay for it. And then I paid for all of it. And then eventually the PA system were cables coming out of our store right down the street over to Victory Square. And so what happened is from noon to 5 o'clock, we had music and we smoked pot and nothing happened. Like the police didn't come, they didn't chase us away. Then we got about 200 people, and people only kind of tentatively smoked. They would look around saying, this is weird, you know, like April 20th, we'll smoke pot just all day because there's music, and we're encouraging and we're exhorting them, smoke pot, here's a joint, you know. And so 200 people that year, and then it was 500 the next year. And then the following year in 1996, we moved to the art gallery, and there's 1,000 people, and it keeps building up. But we start having, but then we take over July 1st too. If you go downtown on Canada Day, it's most famously known in Vancouver as Cannabis Day because we occupy the entire plaza and smoke pot all that day too, right? So we have two days of the year where we take over the main square and the biggest city on the West Coast.
How many days would you like, by the way?
Well, you know, the July 10th people, you know, the dabbers might start getting real pushy about it and want their own day too. So look out for July 10th.
July
coming
10th,
up,
yeah.
which, by the way, is oil spelt. If you turn it around on your phone, 710 is oil, right? So that's it. I mean, it's kind of a little tangential. But
All right. Okay. So when you arrive in Vancouver, this is something that nobody else would ask you probably. But when you arrive in Vancouver, there was a full-blown HIV epidemic. There was a massive open-air injectable cocaine market. The public health experts and the local activists all agreed that the conditions of prohibition, specifically of heroin and cocaine, were exacerbating the consequences of the spread of HIV and Hep C. And there was a push at that time to develop a more sensible policy when it came to the regulation of those drugs, explicitly to save lives. Your store was also in the downtown east side. You were right in that world with the Don McPhersons and Ann Livingstons. I'm wondering, in that context, why you were adamantly pushing for marijuana and not a broader legalization platform that encompassed some of the, quote, harder drugs?
Well, I've always been in favor of legalizing all drugs. In fact, the more dangerous they are, the more urgent it is to legalize them. I mean, there's no public safety danger with pot being prohibited. In other words, pot's illegal, but nobody's dying in the streets from the use of marijuana. So, and when I say, you know, marijuana is virtually legal in Vancouver now, more so than anywhere else in the Western world, that's based on the fact that we have these ideal circumstances. But we've never had ideal circumstances when it comes to the use of hard drugs in the downtown east side. And that's been a long-term problem of homelessness, of mental illness, of compromise. It's poverty, really. I mean, rich people have drug problems too, but you don't see them on the street, right? Ordinary people have drug problems too, but they're not selling their last belongings on the sidewalk in a rather pathetic gesture. And the reason we had that calamity in the 90s is because year after year, hundreds of people were dying from overdoses, like shocking numbers. Like that we
200, I believe, over 200 in 1993, the year before.
Yeah, we don't see any of that these days. Insight has really been helpful. But even then, like 20 years later, we still have safe injection of an illegal substance that has to be bought from sources that still sell things that can kill you. As far as I've never seen anyone sell marijuana in adulterated form that did anybody any harm. I have never seen it. In 20 years of being in the city, I've never seen anyone poisoned by marijuana to the degree that they were toxified and nearly died, or nothing like that. So we don't have a health crisis in the marijuana world. We have a justice crisis, a prison crisis, and a lot of other crises, but we never had the people who use hard drugs. Plus, our motivation is different. We don't use drugs. We don't use marijuana out of compulsion. We're not addicted to marijuana. I believe all use of marijuana is therapeutic. So it's a completely different thing than seeing people dependent. And I had a drug addiction clinic for 2 years.
Yeah.
Of the $5 million I raised and gave away, I devoted $200,000 for a 2-year project where I'd give people ibogaine hydrochloride, which stops drug craving and drug withdrawal immediately. And I would stay with these people. I would live with them. I had a special house. They would live there. I would live there. I would feed them. I would wake them up. I would supervise them. I would take them to the bathroom if they couldn't make it because, you know, they were recovering. And I grew to kind of love those people. I love the people I was with, and I really enjoyed the experience, even though it was costing me a fortune. I didn't charge them any. But what I learned was some really sad stuff. Remember I told you earlier how I grew up in a family of love. My mom was always there. My dad was always there. Every day my dad would throw the baseball to me for half an hour, shoot the hockey puck. I felt loved. When I dealt with people who were addicted to anything, whether it was methamphetamine, cocaine, alcohol, and I was treating them, I would ask them two innocuous questions. Where are you from? Poughkeepsie, New York, or Canton, Ohio. I dealt with people all over North America, and I'd bring them in. I'd pay for them to come in if they were that serious about kicking hard drugs. And then the second question I say was, tell me what life was like with your mother and father. And 59 of those 65 people basically said, I never knew my father. He wasn't in my life. He wasn't there. He was either dead or my parents divorced. That was the most common one. But my father was in the military. A variety of things to show that they came from essentially a broken home and that they were adrift ever since then. They lacked confidence. They lacked a sense of belonging. All these negative emotions would creep up to them and were largely responsible for their drug dependency. And I felt a tremendous sense of sadness for this because I felt so lucky to have two loving parents. But I also had a sense of empathy about what it was that was driving them to this behavior, why they were rejecting themselves, why they were causing such a destruction. I myself have 4 adopted children, and one of them has been a heroin addict for much of his adult life since he was 16. And it's a terribly destructive thing to watch. And it doesn't make any sense to someone like me. Like, why would you hurt yourself deliberately? Why would you live like this knowing that only bad things can come from it? And so I've had to see both things. You know, I'm still in contact with the son who's a drug addict and a drug abuser, and he struggles daily with this and has struggled for 17 years, so I've seen it very close. I've treated him, back when I had the ibogaine clinic, I treated him twice, and it was a wonderful thing. But the problem I had with him was the same problem with every other drug-dependent person. Is I can cure you of that drug addiction, but I can't change your whole way of life. Now that you're here with me for a week, you're good, you've got this great opportunity, you feel terrific, you're not craving drugs, you're not going through withdrawal, but now I send you back to your old milieu where you've got no friends, you've got no job, you've burned every bridge, and the next crisis you have, whether it's financial, relationship, personal, economic, your first instinct is going to be, I need that drug. I need to have that.
So I talked to Anne Livingston before, which some people may know as one of the public health advocates at the time, and she mentioned, she said you were actually extraordinarily generous when it came to kind of investing money and your own personal time and energy into the recovery movement, and you know, Anne agrees with you on almost everything. The one thing she asked though is she wanted to know why you didn't talk about legalization in a broader sense, like when you were, you know, it's more of a semantic question. Did the politics just seem too difficult at the time?
Well, liberty is all directional. One of the things we want to do is how can we liberate the most people in the most efficient use of time? Well, millions and millions of Canadians smoke marijuana, and 2 million of us have criminal records from that over a 45-year period. So the largest good can be done for the largest amount of people if we legalize marijuana first and use that as a demonstration to others about what it would be like, how we can, because we can show once we legalize marijuana that the streets are safer, that taxes are more efficient, that police are less corrupt, they're more efficient. We can show a lot of good things that happen when we show when marijuana is legalized. And from that example, we can show this is what would happen if we did the same thing to cocaine. But we need that example there first. And the public support for legalizing cocaine and heroin is still only around 12%. It's unfortunate that the politicians, many of them know we should legalize drugs, but aren't willing to lead, they're only willing to respond. But when marijuana was only polling 16%, no one wanted to legalize it then, nor were there any politicians. Not a single politician prior to the year 2000 ever said they were in favor of legalization. Now that's the year 2000, 15 years ago. Since then we've had 4 mayors want to legalize. We've got 338 Liberal candidates want to legalize. The leader of the Liberal Party wants to legalize. We've got former attorney generals, former premiers. I mean, who'd have thought that 2 former premiers would be in charge of marijuana companies
Some of those
in the year
mayors,
2015? Ernie Eves, the former premier of Ontario, and Mike Horkhart, former premier of British Columbia, both are principal players in a licensed marijuana company.
So some of those mayors now advocate a more public health approach to the harder drugs. Philip Owen in particular, Larry Campbell.
But never when they're in office. That's the problem.
Yeah.
At least we've got people in office now willing to say we should legalize marijuana. And from there, we've got to build on that kind of progress. I would like to see all drugs legalized, even if it's a form of prescription or some kind of controlled thing. I mean, I'm not really that happy about doctors being gatekeepers. I actually object to most drugs being prescription. I think people should be able to choose what they want. We have access. In fact, I would say we have access. The marijuana is a good example. You go to your doctor, he says, I don't know anything about marijuana. Well, geez, why not? I mean, there's only 1 million articles available. You could find out anything you want by looking it up. The doctors just don't go outside of their milieu. If it didn't come from a doctor and handed to me specifically, they don't know about it, right? So we have all this information, so we can educate ourselves about marijuana. We know that if you smoke marijuana every day, you won't get Alzheimer's disease. No one gets Alzheimer's who smokes marijuana every day. There's simply not an example on the earth of that. My mother died of Alzheimer's, and I could not convince her to smoke marijuana. And I feel bad about that. And the reason I want to get a license to possess is only on that basis, because I don't want to get Alzheimer's disease. Mm-hmm. And I have no other particular therapeutic use that I'm aware of right now. I mean, our health is only as good as we think it is right now. It's possible that cannabis has prevented me from getting so many ailments. I believe that. I believe that every time I have cannabis inside me, it's good for me, and has kept me by and large healthy for 57 years. But I say healthy as far as I know. I have no idea what would have been like if I'd not smoked marijuana, just like we have no comparisons, but I feel better having taken marijuana in, and I feel like my health is being looked after as best as I possibly can using cannabis.
So last question then on the public health side of things before we move on. Do you think that that may be at its least articulate? The legalization movement for marijuana can sometimes inadvertently prop up or reify the logic of prohibitionism on harder drugs. And I'm thinking specifically when people in favor of legalizing marijuana talk about its softness and its safeness and how healthy it is, and they use those as reasons for legalizing. Which is something I've heard you do in the past as well. Do you ever worry that maybe kind of reinforces the notion that hard drugs, because they're dangerous, should be illegal?
Well, people have to use whatever is going to convince you the person you're dealing with. If you're talking to your mother, it's probably a good thing to say, Mom, pot's really safe. Here's all the studies that prove it, so don't worry about me. That's a good attitude to have to your mother, because your mother's not interested in whether your civil rights are being violated, not to the same degree, or whether you have an entitlement, an issue, or whether it's justice or that sort of thing. I mean, they might be concerned that you could go to jail or what have you, but I think depending on who you're trying to convince, you need to use those arguments. So by saying it's safe and no one's ever died from marijuana and that it's good for you, and I mean, I have a better argument for a mother. I try and tell people, listen, you should encourage your kids to smoke pot. You absolutely should. Because one thing I do know about young people, they're looking for a group to hang out with. And they have a lot of choices. They could hang out with the alcohol people. And we always know what those groups are because everybody's trying to recruit. When we are smoking pot, we pass that joint to someone. We're recruiting at all times.
My people were alcohol and marijuana people. I mean,
well, the pot people recruit, we pass a joint. And I think you can observe that the pot people are generally quieter, more aware, more politically inclined, peaceful people who are not going to use deception. The alcohol people, for example, all meet in bars where people don't even trust the story they're telling to each other. They don't trust each other personally. They all think you're going to try and get me in bed. You're trying to have sex with me. You're lying. You're telling me a story.
This offends me as an alcohol person.
But everybody knows that if you're in a bar, you take any conversation with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
It's not to be believed. See, there's no other environment I know of where you would do that you would suspend your rational faculties because we're in a bar and I know you're lying to me and I know you're trying to seduce me. So there's an example. That's a clique where they don't trust each other. They're out to make each other dumber and more intoxicated. They're going to take advantage of each other. They can't be trusted, right? And so look at all the other groups, the cocaine people or the club people or the people huffing gas. I mean, you look at all the people you could get your young people to hang out with. And I would say you're going to be 100% safe by saying, just hang out with the pot people, please.
So the answer is basically optics and strategy. So you believed even then at the time that a comprehensive public health approach to drug policy was the right way forward, but maybe not the right way to talk about it.
I actually get a little creeped out when I see these public health people tell us that the ideal form of legalization is really rigid controls, like we can't advertise. I heard this recently advocated that we shouldn't have any advertising of marijuana. Absolutely not. We need to advertise marijuana all over the place to every other person. We need to tell the people who are on pills, get off those pills. You know, I mean, maybe not get off them as blithely as that, but listen, there are thousands of people who say marijuana got them off all their painkillers, all their other drugs. We need to be able to buy big billboards and say, this joint, you know, leads to a life of happiness, and all these things lead to a life of dependency and misery and all that stuff. We need to be able to talk to the public and tell them, listen, all this other crap is bad for you. And we finally have the economic power to buy billboards and to manufacture things and to buy ads saying, that's all crap, that's the truth, what we're telling you. You should try our stuff. Compare the two. Compare your life after a month of alcohol versus a month of weed, then make a decision. Or prescription drugs. We need to be able to advertise. We need to be able to have the leaf on the front of our businesses. There should be no second-class citizen-like aspect accepted for the cannabis culture in the long run. In the short run, we can put up with these inconveniences of this transition to legalization, right? But
do you think the marijuana legalization movement is ready to embrace a broader fight against prohibitionism now?
No, not at all. The public hasn't moved at all in 20 years on legalizing hard drugs.
But it hadn't moved when you started campaigning for marijuana as well.
Right, but we haven't got that done yet. Like, it's one thing to say Vancouver is living in a golden age, but I constantly remind people Vancouver is just a small part of Canada, and I have a great love for Canada, and I want to see all Canada without marijuana prohibition. I want to see all of Canada like Vancouver, which will probably put some of us out of business if the rest of the country does. Because, I mean, Vancouver is the marijuana breadbasket for Canada. We have weed being sold all over the world from Vancouver. We have it being made here. We have shatter being made here, waxes. It's being grown in huge, prodigious quantities. It's being sold. Everybody from the Lower Mainland makes a pilgrimage every 5 to 10 days to buy their weed out of Vancouver. Like 2.5 million people come to ours for the 60 dispensaries that we have that we don't have anywhere else. Why don't we have that? Because the RCMP takes their orders from Ottawa, the Conservative government, and they won't let any lounges or dispensaries set up in Burnaby or Richmond or New West or Mission. So we should be very grateful. We've had Chief Constable Chu as our Chief of Police since 2007, because in the time since he's been on the police, and Gregor Robertson has been on the police board and the mayor of our city, and we've had a very sympathetic city council, and we've got all these entrepreneurs opening up shops. Everything has gone our way in Vancouver specifically because of this kind of synergy we've got. Everybody's come together. All the politicians agree that prohibition's a bad idea, but that we have limits on what we can do federally to do that. So we recreate our environment. So you've got the chief of police on board, you've got the mayor on board, all the city council on board. You've got, and you got the province basically saying nothing, right? Just letting it all happen, right? Even Christy Clark has not gotten involved, but at the same time, she hasn't interfered. She could get her Solicitor General or Attorney General to start laying charges in Vancouver, but they don't want to do it either. Right? So we're in the biggest unspoken conspiracy in the history of Canada that everybody agrees marijuana should be legal, and we're just going to go around in Vancouver and pretend like it is, and let's just see how that all works out, right?
Which is not always how it's been handled, which is the transition to the next. Yeah, you know Don McPherson. He was the...
right, yeah, good fellow.
Yeah, and he was the drug policy coordinator during some of the early days, and he remembered, I called him and told him I was interviewing you, and he remembered a story, so I don't have all the details right, but basically your store got raided, and the next day you had installed vaporizers on every table, and they had no idea what vaporizers even were. And they thought, oh shit, now we're going to have to figure out what this thing is.
Well, I opened the Cannabis Cafe, which I'm happy to say was the first vaporizer lounge in the world, and that was in 1997. So it's almost 20 years ago now. 18 years ago we came out with the Cannabis Cafe, where there was a vaporizer at every table. And when we got raided 6 months later, and I've been raided many, many times, 5 times by Vancouver police over the years, they took all those vaporizers, but they found actually an obscure law, and I didn't even know this law existed, but I've been convicted of it, of promoting vaporizers. Because
that can't be a law.
Because every table had instructions on how to use a vaporizer.
Did you figure out when the law was written promoting vaporizers?
No, but I just know that John Connery urged me to plead guilty to all of them so that it would cost very little money and we'd get a small fine and then we'd go about our business. In the first 4 raids that I had, which were largely to stop us from having a cafe with vaporizers and selling seeds and all these different things we were doing. Sorry, where was
We were talking about vaporizers.
Yeah. Well, and so when they came and took them away, they looked through every law they could. So I've been charged with giving hash away, promoting vaporizers, selling vaporizers. Actually, all bongs and pipes are still illegal according to the criminal code, but we simply ignored that. Like, a part of our campaign was, let's create, like Gandhi says, let's create the change we want to see. So we're going to pretend it's legal with some caution, and we're just going to go do that. And that's how you create that environment like we have in Vancouver, where people just go about acting like it's legal, but they have to be willing to go to jail when the police want to confront you. But eventually they begin to relent.
Another good transition, some caution, but not total caution. When did you decide to start selling marijuana seeds?
In 1994, when I opened Hemp BC on July 2nd, we were selling bongs and pipes, and we just managed to get books and magazines legal, and we were challenging them on the bongs and pipes, and we were encouraging other people to open up a shop like mine. I didn't want to own them all. I said, here's how I did it. It only took me $15,000. You should open a shop in your neighborhood too. And within a year, 60 shops opened up in Canada following this model. And then I went to Amsterdam to report on the progress in Canada, that was my job. And I met a guy named Ben Dronkers of Sensi Seed Bank. And I got up and said, well, this year we made books and magazines legal in Canada about marijuana. And we started selling bongs again, and we're hoping to create this revolutionary kind of spirit of capitalism in Canada, where we can, develop a political infrastructure, an economic infrastructure, an activist infrastructure. I basically wanted to recreate a whole society. So we needed communication, magazines. So we started Cannabis Culture and Pot TV. We needed to start a political party, so that was the BC Marijuana Party. We needed to have an economic basis, so I started teaching people how to open stores and get into capitalism and commerce. And then there was the kind of a social nature, so we started having cafes and meeting places and all that. So basically what gays had done, they had created their own media, their own social clubs, their own neighborhoods, etc. In other words, if you're going to try and oppress us, we're going to set up on our own over here and just do our thing, and then if you want to interfere with us, good luck. And that's what we tried to do. We were just going to pretend it was all legal, and we're going to tell people to go about doing it, and then face up to the consequences if you get challenged. But you don't always get challenged. A lot of times, the establishment will let you do it to see what happens, because they want to see what happens.
Was it a difficult decision to decide to sell the seeds overseas, not overseas, but sorry, in the United States?
I realized you could make a lot of money really fast. And in fact, every seed person around the world tends to make a lot of money, and they spend it on things. But I didn't need money for anything else. I have no particular needs or wants that require money. I don't travel, never did travel much there. And when I've traveled to Europe recently, somebody paid for the flights and the hotel, so I didn't use my money. And so I really needed nothing. So I thought, in fact, I told Ben Dronkers right then and there, I said, I'm going to do exactly what you're doing. I want to raise millions of dollars. I want to fund a revolution. I want to make things happen fast. So when I came back, I immediately started selling seeds. We were very successful, but I got raided 4 times in the next 2 years. But it didn't stop me. They took everything. They took $500,000 in assets each in those first 2 raids. Didn't matter. We're going to keep doing it. Doesn't matter. This is not, we're not here to debate whether it's possible. We're simply going to go ahead and do it. And I was able to give away $5 million in that $10 million, including paying for the signatures to get the Washington, D.C. Medical Marijuana Initiative on the ballot, which was successful. The Colorado Medical Marijuana Initiative of 2000, which we were the biggest individual funder, that was successful. We actually paid for a lot of Arizona's signatures, and that was successful too, but it got overturned later on in the courts. We helped Alaska 3 times. We were there when we were suing the U.S. federal government. We were sponsoring political parties all over the world, like Israel, giving money to the Israeli Green Leaf Party, which is actually in an election this week and hoping to get their first member of the Knesset, their parliament in there. I gave money. We bought full-page ads in New Zealand to help the legalized cannabis party contest the elections there. So I was having an amazingly fun time fucking shit up all over the world.
Okay, yeah, but while you're...
And I was shocked that a guy like me could go to Israel and buy ads, or New Zealand, and start telling people how they should vote for there. I thought this was amazing.
As you were fucking shit up all over the world, the DEA was doing some math, and they have interesting math skills. And what they determined is that you had moved enough seeds to go to jail for 2,000 life sentences.
It's something about 60 life sentences.
Not 2,000.
If you're responsible for over 60,000 plants in the United States, then that makes you a drug kingpin, and you're subject to the death penalty, or at the very least life without parole. And so when I was finally arrested, the U.S. government made the argument that I had boasted that I had sent 3 million seeds to the U.S. alone, so they didn't need to do any research. They just quoted my saying. And 3 million seeds, they said, is equal to 3 million plants, is what they first contended, and that was the death sentence, like times 40 or something, some large numbers. Anyway, it was real bad. When I got served with that, when I was arrested and I saw wanted for extradition to the United States, and then they first told me they were looking for 28 to 40 years. They weren't going to seek the death penalty. And the reason, one of the reasons that being Canadian is helpful is that they won't extradite you if you face the death penalty. So life imprisonment, yes, they'll extradite you. And originally the DEA wanted 28 to 40 years. They called me one of the top 50 most wanted in the world. They said I was the most wanted drug kingpin in Canada.
Did you anticipate they'd go after you?
No, I thought the Canadian government would charge me, and then, and I knew judges would be lenient. So then I thought I was pretty immune. So when I finally that the U.S. was going to extradite me, and they were serious about it, and they've never extradited anybody else for seeds. And in fact, there's no one in the U.S. criminal justice system convicted of seeds to this day, other than the time I spent there. But you know, it was very flattering when I was arrested. The DEA went on and on about he gave millions to these legalization groups. Well, now they have one less pot of money to draw from, et cetera, et cetera. So I had clearly done the right thing all along. Is that they didn't even mention my crime in their press release. They didn't say he's selling seeds and therefore somehow we've made him one of the top 50 most wanted in the world. Because how did that happen? Like I was scared because when they said I was one of the top 50 most wanted in the world drug kingpin targets, I thought, oh my God, that's really serious. And when they said they want 28 to 40 years, you do feel kind of like your life just leaving your body when someone tells you that they're looking to get you for 28 to 40 years.
So it wasn't something all along that you were kind of contending with?
No, I thought some judge would give me, like, the most I'd got in Canada, and that's a lot, was 3 months for passing one joint. And that's a very severe penalty to pass one joint. After I spoke at University of Saskatchewan. These were all adults. It was somebody 22 years old. The police didn't even see the marijuana. They just had somebody said I passed them a joint, and that was enough to charge me, hold me without bail for 7 days, and then put me in jail for 3 months. And
let's read some of the documents that you were referencing before. So this is DEA Administrator Karen Tandy. And this, I believe it's a statement made the day that you're arrested. Am I right?
Yep.
So I'm just going to read the first bit of it. Today's DEA arrest of Marc Scott Emery, publisher of Cannabis Culture magazine and founder of marijuana legalization group, is a significant blow not only to, and I believe she says to the marijuana trafficking or something, but also to the marijuana legalization movement. What do you think when you hear that statement?
You burn. No, she lost. She lost. Let's face it. That's all bravado from them. You know, when people say, was it worth it? I went to jail for just under 5 years, 4.5 years exactly, and it was the best trade I could ever have negotiated, because what do we get from that? 3 million plants? Like, I did say 3 million plants. I couldn't deny it in court. Yeah, I boasted that. I know exactly how many I sent. We sent 3 million plants to the United States, which they calculated the tonnage of it is staggering. It's several hundred tons. And they also projected that it goes on every year because they said people are making cuttings from all those plants. So they had these fabulous projections that I was responsible for more marijuana than any other human being could make possible. This, at the same time, while being scary because I'm going to jail, made me feel very proud that to this day I'm still responsible for tons and tons of marijuana in the United States every year, that those cuttings live on, that all that money I gave, the people in Colorado for 12 years had a medical marijuana law sponsored by some Canadian renegade who was just trying to fuck shit up, right? And so I thought, that's amazing. That's living out the dream. That, you know, when you can do that. Now, the price for the dream is you're going to go to jail, in my case, for 5 years. But
could have been for 40.
Could have, oh, see, and believe me, I was grateful for that because everybody else I was with in prison, American prison, there were so many people in for 10, 15, 20, 30 years or life for drugs, right? And many for marijuana, like guys who put weed in a U-Haul and cross across state lines, that's a federal, they got 10, 15 years. All the time I saw this. So eventually I do feel grateful just to have 5 years because I'm going to get out while I'm still like sentient. You know, and I had a loving wife who came to see me 81 times. Jody came to see me 81 times for 164 days, which is 5.5 months of her life, sitting beside me about 9 inches away for 6 hours a day, which I savored and enjoyed. Like, that was the best thing about prison. But in addition to 5.5 months of her life sitting beside me visiting, another 5.5 months of her life was in transit because it took her 14 hours to get to Mississippi and 14 hours to come back. So a huge amount of her life, 11 months, with either sitting beside me, visiting with me, or just traveling to see me. And so my experience in prison was so much better than everybody else's, because I got the love from afar. I got 7,500 letters, 6,500 of them from Americans. About 1,000 Canadians would have written me in that time. And I felt loved at all times, and I felt acknowledged, and I got sweet letters. In fact, so sweet, people would say, "Oh, you must be terrible in this prison. You're rotting away there." And I'd have to write them, "Listen, I'm not in bad shape. Please don't think of me like that. I'm fine." Inmates are very respectful towards me. In fact, they were really nice to me all the time, even big, tough guys. And one of the things I've seen in prison is like at least 50 people are covered in tattoos from head to toe. I'd never seen that before, like their face covered, their head covered, everything about them covered in tattoos. So, I mean, these are badass dudes. About 1 in 8 were serving life. Many of them had come down from the penitentiary and had seen very rough times, and yet they were all, oddly enough, extremely kind to me.
So let's get back to the prison stuff in a second. I just want to point out incidentally that statement that the DEA made is full of just all sorts of horrible marijuana puns. I believe they say that they drained the legalization movement's pot, and that you're a lot of up in smoke.
Yeah,
I think they said 3 times up in smoke.
And that's the one thing that's still the same after 25 years of doing this, is that the newspapers and people still use those bad puns. They love puns, and marijuana invokes so many of them. So,
who do you blame for the extradition?
Well, gee, it's funny you should say blame, because blame implies that there's some negative feeling I have.
Do you have no negative feeling, for instance, for John McKay?
No, I don't. In fact, John McKay, my prosecutor, who originally swore out the indictment to me, and it basically was going to lead the prosecution, later writes Proposition 502 for Washington State. Jody, my wife, becomes on good terms with him, and they do press conferences both in Vancouver and Washington together, supporting legalization. So to me, he is repentant. When you become an activist for our side, no apology is necessary to me. That's the apology. I'm my idea. Same with Philip Owen. Philip Owen had me raided 4 times. He said I was going to be toast. He wanted to make sure I was driven away from Vancouver. And now when I see him, he's a friend, and he's all wanting to legalize wine. He's very polite and gracious to me and stuff. Now,
what about Irwin? What about Irwin Coulter?
Irwin Cotler was the Liberal Justice Minister who signed the original extradition notice. I'm a little disappointed with him.
You called him a Jewish Nazi.
Okay, now the thing is, and I feel bad about that because I have a great deal of kinship with Jewish people. I've often written articles that cite that the Jews and the cannabis culture are the 2 most persecuted cultures of the last 100 years. The Jews have suffered far more, I may add. But you know what? 30 million people worldwide have been arrested for cannabis in the last 50 years exactly. 30 million is no small number. That's the largest number of people rounded up for any cultural lifestyle thing in the history of the last 100 years. Even there were millions of Jews killed, but that number is finite. But the number is not finite for pot people. It's 30 million and counting. And millions of those people went to jail. Thousands of them had died. So let me just say that I've often made this comparison, and I wrote a biography of a woman who escaped the Holocaust. I have a lot of love for Jewish culture. Great comedians, great movies, great. I mean, 107 Nobel Prize winners are Jewish, and they only represent less than 1% of the population of Earth. I mean, these are an amazing people. But my statement to Irwin Cotler, when I was in jail, by the way, 3 months for passing 1 joint, was that here's a famed civil rights activist who continues day to day to lock up cannabis people, and I'm one of them. If you're a great civil rights activist, as you say, and you're the justice minister, why don't you set us free? Why don't you do the right thing? And I said, are you behaving like the Nazis did toward the Jews? Are you rounding us up because of our lifestyle and putting us in jail? And as a person who went to jail 3 months for passing 1 joint, I had the right to say that, because that's an outrageous punishment to be put in jail 1,000 miles from home because I pass a joint to another adult. And that we still have laws like that, and that you're the justice minister in charge. So it was a rhetorical question. Would I call you a Nazi Jew because you were willing to put people away for the most trivial of actions for months on end? And I thought it was a good question. And it's been distorted, but you have to be responsible for what you say. So I'm glad you asked it so I could explain it. But and I bear him no ill will.
No, really?
No, I don't. Listen, if they hadn't have been who they are, doing what they're doing, if he hadn't have tried to, if he hadn't have signed under that extradition, let's say he refused it. Maybe he diffuses an issue and we don't make the progress we make. See, I've already paid the price, but we're still getting the benefits, so I wouldn't want it any other way, because we're going to benefit by all these things happening for years and years to come. The momentum is unchangeable. We are going to legalize marijuana around the world. Right now we're facing an intellectual wave of support for our position that I've never seen before, that exists in every country on earth. And there are intellectuals and politicians and media advocates saying we should legalize marijuana. And hopefully when that's done, they'll start saying we need to legalize all those drugs to get rid of the cartels, to allow people to get medical attention, to eliminate the stigma. No one exists positively in life by bearing a stigma for something they do. So when we legalize something, we tend to get rid of that stigma as well.
I have some hard-hitting prison questions. I hear you learned how to play the bass guitar in prison?
Yeah.
How did that
Let me just tell
go?
people one thing, too. Sexual violence in American federal prisons is a great deal less than has been led to be. I mean, I heard these bad jokes, don't bend over for the soap or whatever.
Yeah, were you worried about it going?
No. And first of all, I'm too old to become considered prey for anybody, I'm thinking, right? But when I went to prison, the most uncool thing you could do that would get you isolated and beat up in no time at all would be to prey on another prisoner. If other guys, because in prison it's very clever in a way. I was the only Canadian there, so I was a Canadian gang of one. But everybody from Alabama there is part of an Alabama clique, and that means if some young kid came by who was 18 from Alabama, nobody's going to be preying on him because everybody from Alabama is looking after him, and he's told that right away. You don't have to worry about things. You just behave, do your thing, you serve your time. Nothing bad is going to happen to you because we're here for you if you need to be, right? And you're expected to be there for them if they need you too. And so that's how it links up. So this idea that somebody is being preyed on sexually, it would just never happen in any of the prisons I've been in. It would just be very, very uncool. So that having been said, there is violence there, but I'm not part of it. When you're a minority of one, you tend not to be involved in things, right? And prison is a very polite society, because if you and I get into an argument over something and I push you or I even touch you, everybody you're associated with is involved, and everybody I'm associated with is involved. And really they don't want that, and then the prison gets locked down and we're all in our cells for days on end. So everyone wants to avoid that. So it's extremely polite. For example, there is no anonymous social media trolls badgering people like you do in the real world, saying awful things and making shit up and being anonymous. You can't be anonymous in prison.
Actions have
When you
consequences
say
in prison.
something, you better either back that up or apologize right now, or there's going to be a confrontation. So everything has a confrontation if you don't settle it. So prison was very polite.
You dodged my bass guitar question.
Yeah. Okay, I never picked up an instrument in my life. And when I got there, I saw this amazing band play a concert for Memorial Day just after I arrived. And I knew 30 of the 31 songs. I didn't know the song Francine by ZZ Top. But everything else, I really knew and liked their songs. And I told them, you guys are amazing. Where do you learn all the songs? And they said, well, a lot of us are really experienced, like 15 to 30 years. He said, so we remember these songs out of memory, and we understand how they're supposed to go, so we can do that. I said, you don't have any music books, songs? They said, no, we'd love those, but there's none here. So people always used to ask me, Mark, can I get you anything? So I'd say, yes, send me guitar books. And they would send me dozens and dozens of them. And the guys eventually had huge amounts, so they knew I was really interested in music, and they really appreciated the fact that I was allowing them to really expand their range of what they could play. And then one day I was futzing around a guitar, just having a horrible time. It was just very painful on my fingers. And one of the guys from the band I like, said, listen, if you put that guitar away and pick up a bass guitar, I will teach you how to play. You can be in our band, and I'll have you ready for our next concert in 6 weeks. And I said, really? You're talking to me, and you think you're going to teach me to be in your band of this incredible musicians, and I'll be in your band, and we'll be playing in 6 weeks? And he says, yeah, how hard could it be? Well, he was right. He taught me 8 songs. And then over the next 3 years, I was in that band. It becomes my band really remarkably, because I'm the only one that's not incredibly good, so I don't have any ego about it. So they find that that's the best person to be in charge of the band because all the other guys are outstanding.
I don't find it
musicians.
remarkable that you became in charge of the band.
Yeah, okay. and then so it becomes my band, and this is really amazing.
Yeah.
And then I eventually do 14 concerts over 3 years and do 150 songs. And I played country songs. I even know how to sing some country songs, like Way Out Here, which is like got lines like our necks are burned, our trucks ain't clean, we smoke, we fry, we chew everything, right? And I'm singing this song, and I'm thinking this is pretty outlandish, right? Because I know nothing of this lifestyle, right? And if you ever come around here, son, and you're not welcome, be prepared to meet Jesus and a gun, right? That's one of the lines in that song, right? And I'm singing this song with all these crackers, and anyway, it's an interesting time. So I end up playing 5 Bob Marley songs, a bunch of R&B songs, Otis Redding, rhythm and blues, country redneck songs, 5, and I loved them all. I loved them all. I really, you know what's funny? If it wasn't for the barbed wire fences and the regimentation and the lousy food, I would have enjoyed that experience. In fact, I dare say, except for missing Jody, I did enjoy that experience. I got to read a book every 10 days. I had 25 magazine subscriptions. I had a daily subscription to the New York Times, which I read thoroughly. I did a Sunday New York Times crossword every 2 or 3 days. I'm in this band, I'm playing. My biggest concern is how to get good food, and I've got a whole network of guys smuggling and getting stuff out of the warehouse and out of the officer's mess. And so it's just like out of a scene in one of those movies like King Rat where a guy says, Mark, I even got a T-bone steak once, perfectly, you know, and he said, $15. I said, I'll take that T-bone steak, you know, and type of thing. And then guys would bring, like, one day you get a bag of broccoli, a whole bag of broccoli, or a whole bag of mushrooms, and it's like, you know, type of thing. And that was the big deal of my day, smuggling and getting food enough to eat, right? So I had quality thinking time I don't have now. I haven't read a single book since I've been back. Those magazines pile up. I don't have time to read them. I go to work every day now. I haven't done a New York Times. I did one New York Times crossword recently, okay, so I did that. And I just haven't done any of the things I really enjoyed doing in prison that I swore I would try to continue to do, you know, because you get that way. Man, I love reading books. I love reading these magazines. I love doing that. It'd be great to do when I get home. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just too tired after working all, you know, at the lounge and the store and doing all that singing. And social media, it's these things. They have destroyed magazines and books and all those other things because I look at that now. And I should look at that now because I'm promoting the movement. I'm promoting my store. Everything I do goes through Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and newspapers, the social media, right? And even then, I'm grateful I just barely get to read those 4 newspapers I get every day because I can see they're on the way out too because it's so hard to read print and read books anymore with this device that we've got everywhere with us at all times.
So we build this talk as a conversation about the future and then spent a long, long time talking about the past, which is like a very academic thing to do, I guess. You've said that you are going to campaign for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals.
Absolutely. This is an unprecedented opportunity. Every Canadian who smokes marijuana should feel this way. Now, I've said that Vancouver looks pretty legal. Vancouver is right now we have this wonderful legal environment where nobody's being busted for anything to do with pot. Just not happening. And it's really the ideal circumstances where we're self-regulating. Everybody's regulating ourselves. You know, I sell marijuana creams that are great for pain, one of Dana Larson's companies, and they're amazing. But no one's regulating. You know, it's got active THC in it, but no one's regulating. But it's still great. Everybody's agreeing the product is good, right? So we don't need regulation there. We've got drinks, we've got foods, we've got edibles. All these things are happening. No one is getting poisoned. No one is dying. There's no chaos in the streets. There's no gang shooting. There's nothing. In other words, we actually in Vancouver have set a tremendous example of what a legal environment could be like without any government regulation whatsoever. I contend we don't really need it. Right? But if you need an example of what to do in your community, try and emulate what we have in Vancouver and how that has come about, right? Is that we've got a unanimous agreement on it. But now the rest of the country needs that opportunity to take Vancouver's example and apply it in their community and see that it also has no negative social byproduct. There's not a bad side. There's not a downside to this. And the only way we can do that outside of continuing to agitate and going to jail, civil disobedience. I'm sure people with lounges will get arrested across Canada and they will go to jail and they will contest it in the courts and they may win and they may not win. But if we could get everybody on the same page on October 19th this year, then that's legalization day. That's going to be a date in history that if we elect a Liberal majority, we can say we legalize marijuana that day. And that's the only opportunity we're really going to get on a
Well, wait, I have
level.
a couple questions about that. So is it legalization day? Because the Liberals have pulled the football away a couple times on this issue in the 70s with
Yep.
Justin's dad, and then with Chrétien later. Are you confident that actually a Justin Trudeau and a Liberal victory equals for sure legal marijuana?
Oh, absolutely. When you've got, it's not just one guy, it's 338 Liberal candidates in the next election, all going to be saying, our policy is to legalize marijuana, and I support that policy. And you've got the leader, and you've got, besides that, the numbers, 70% of Canadians want to legalize or decriminalize marijuana, and it's higher in British Columbia. So these are not numbers that people need to run away from. And that having been said, it's getting to that point where I get past the cynicism of our people. Our people don't vote in the first place. So my job to get them to vote is made doubly hard by the fact that they say, oh, how can you trust them? They lie to us. They do lie to us. Trudeau said he was going to decrim, he didn't do it. Joe Clark in 1970 said he would do it, he didn't do it. Jack Layton said he would advocate it and say great things about it when he did an interview with me, and then you never heard from him again. Chrétien promised to make it a $100 fine and decriminalize it. So yeah, we've been lied to, but no party ever in the history of Canada has ever said all of us, all 338, are agreeing with this policy. The party agrees with this policy. The leader agrees with this policy. And Canadians agree with this policy. This is a total winner. They have greatly underestimated the impact that this issue is going to have, because nothing else, you can't really vote on any other issue. When you're voting for Stephen Harper, you're getting that kind of stuff that Stephen Harper delivers to you. And if you hate Stephen Harper, you hate him and you want to get rid of him. But we actually have something to vote for, very specific. And it will do a lot for us, too. First of all, let's remember, 2 million Canadians have criminal records after 45 years. As soon as marijuana is legal, it's very reasonable for us. And by the way, liberty is always directional. Just because he says he's going to legalize doesn't mean it's going to be our kind of legalization. We're still getting liquor laws corrected 70 years after we ended prohibition in British Columbia. So there's a lot of tinkering that goes on for generations to make something more legal than it was last week or last year or last decade. So, we have our work cut out for us. But it's essentially, we're going to get the debate beyond legalization. Okay, we're legalizing it, so no one should go to jail. So if we can agree that no one should go to jail, the rest is all regulatory. And we're going to be able to live with that. Because legalization means no one goes to jail if you grow your own pot. If I'm growing my own pot, why? Obviously, if it's legal, I should be able to grow my own. Now, maybe the city will regulate it so that you can't grow it with lights inside. Maybe you have to grow it in the backyard. Maybe there's going to be stuff we're going to need to debate and discuss. But we're going to discuss it from a position that we're a legitimate demographic. We're all citizens. We're entitled to full equal rights. So you can't punish us based on some perception you have that this is a vice or a weakness or a moral failing. Marijuana can no longer be considered that anymore. Marijuana is a medicine. Marijuana is a euphoric. Marijuana is the active pursuit that adults can do in a free and just society without any kind of stigma or attack.
But even the people who agree with you on that, after all of this time with Harper, with the attacks on federal science, the increasing censorship, the PRification of the government, adventurism overseas, militarily.
We're fighting a war that we were committed not to be in. Now we're fighting in Iraq. By the way, Stephen Harper wanted to do that when he was an opposition leader, so now he gets his wish.
Right. The systemic defunding of the arts, the undervaluing of journalism, all these different issues, and then not to mention the economy and jobs. I mean, isn't it more reasonable for a pot smoker who favors legalization to add up the sum of all those issues, hear the arguments from the NDP as well, and take those into consideration when they cast their ballot?
No.
Why?
Because you can vote some other time on those issues. Those issues never get resolved. Okay? By the way, we can accomplish what you want by electing Justin Trudeau. So let me tell you this. I met this guy. I mean, sure, he denies having smoked pot with me, but it was 11 years ago. It was on some nice sunny afternoon with other people drinking wine, friends of ours.
But he did smoke pot with you?
I'm saying he did, and I'm thinking my memory is pretty good. But you know what? My memory might not be good. After 11 years, I've learned to notice that eyewitnesses are often wrong. People's memories actually change based sometimes on what they'd like things to be. Mm-hmm. So Justin Trudeau, he may not just recall it. He may say, I don't remember that, right? I mean, he was there. We had some wine. Does he have to remember? Yeah, but to him, it's just an ordinary afternoon. There's nothing special. Since then, he's been married, had 3 kids, become a member of parliament and the leader of the opposition, potentially the next prime minister. Why would he remember something that happened 11 years ago in one afternoon? So I'm willing to...
You don't think the fact that it's politically inconvenient to remember it might be more the...
I think he would have probably come out better if he said, oh, yeah, I remember we did smoke a joint once, and then just left it at that, instead of making a big furor about denying it. So in other words, I had to say, well, okay, maybe my memory is flawed, but it might be. Not everything I recall is as I remembered. And I learned that by writing my memoirs, and I wrote some of my memoirs, and I gave it to some people who were there, and they said, Mark, that was in another country. That wasn't in Turkey we did that. That was in Greece, right? And so I'm thinking, oh, so I do remember things differently.
But I got us distracted. So you were telling me why why those other issues aren't.
Well, they're not important to me because nothing you can do will make those things happen. There's no guarantee the NDP are going to reverse every Stephen Harper thing and make it all better, right? And there's no guarantee the Liberals are going to do it. But I will tell you this, Justin Trudeau is a reasonable man. Stephen Harper is not a reasonable man. Stephen Harper is an authoritarian who believes he knows the right way more than anyone else. Whereas Justin Trudeau doesn't believe that at all. He believes, I'm going to surround myself with really good advisors, take the best advice I can get, and go with that. And I know him enough to know that that's what he would do. He doesn't have a dictatorial streak in him. He doesn't have a bossy streak in him. If anything, in a way, he's a little overly cautious. But that's going to be good for a leader of a country in these kind of era, this era. You don't want people going to war suddenly. You don't want people getting in a moral panic when somebody shoots a soldier, and next thing you know, he's bringing in all this legislation to curtail our freedoms like Stephen Harper would do. I'm trusting, and I have good basis for that Justin Trudeau is going to be a much more reasonable leader than Stephen Harper. And that having been said, the issue is still really getting rid of Stephen Harper, legalizing pot. That's all that's on my radar, and that's all that anybody can really expect when they go to vote next year, or just be able to accomplish those two things. And everything else is a bonus if we get stuff.
I think am I getting a meaningful look from back there? No, no meaningful look. Okay, great. So then I have a question about, there are reportedly 60 dispensaries in Vancouver. You've called Vancouver, I think in this interview, you said this is what the future might look like, is Vancouver right now. Is there an argument, and then of course we've seen all the action in the United States, is there an argument to be made that this thing is rolling on its own at this point? It's inevitable, and so electing Justin Trudeau, regardless of what he says about marijuana, it shouldn't be that big of a priority?
Okay, there's truth to what you say. Even if Stephen Harper gets reelected, we're still going to see legal marijuana. He's just going to make it a more uncomfortable one. He's going to make it a more costly one, a more punishing one. But we're going in that direction. There's nothing even he can do to stop it. But he can make it more uncomfortable. He can punish us because he doesn't believe we're a legitimate culture. That's a really important problem. Trudeau believes it's a legitimate culture. He believes we have a right to do this. He's done it himself. So there's no way he can use, oh, you're bad people. Stephen Harper clearly says, you marijuana people are bad people. You're holdovers of the 60s. I hate the 60s is what Stephen Harper says. I hate everything about the 60s. I hate the free love. I hate the liberty. I hate the freedom you're having. I hate the marijuana. He even hates the music in his own weird passive-aggressive way. He plays it, but he hates it.
Yeah, did you...
Right? He doesn't want his kids to hear it, but it's okay for him.
Gordon,
right?
He played A Little Help from My Friends, and he's saying I get high with a little help from my friends.
See, there he's just being sadistic there. Because, I mean...
I think that was meant especially for you.
Well... All I know is he's the strangest leader this country's ever had, in my opinion. Most powerful people have a certain kind of weird... charisma about them, like Bill Clinton. Whenever anybody I know met Bill Clinton, they melted. They think, he's just awestruck. You meet powerful people, there's some charisma around. If I met Richard Branson, I think I'd feel that way. Charismatic guy. Oh, you're in the presence of somebody special. He's the most sexless, charismaless, friendless, loveless. No, you know what? I've never met anybody in any of you who say I'm a friend of Stephen Harper's. Stephen Harper has no friends. I'm not kidding. He has no friends. And I'm sure, and it's a terrible thing to say, I'm sure his relationship with his wife is sexless. And it's been said by people in his inner circle in memoirs that he, by and large, is asexual. He doesn't really have any sexual attitudes. And I'm just thinking we don't need people like that. We need at least a prime minister that smoked a joint once. Presumably, Trudeau's very attractive to women. He's got some gravitas and charisma, so he's at least he's exchanging pheromones with people. I'm not sure what Stephen Harper exchanges with the Canadians. It's like he's got this permanently paternal attitude towards, like we're all ill-disciplined children that he needs to spank occasionally or often, and he needs to tell us what to do, and that we're only successful as long as he's in that position to do that, right? I mean, it's a very creepy kind of leadership, of cold, lifeless, It's just, I don't get it. I just don't know how a person like that got to a position to be prime minister. But now that he's been prime minister for 10 years, and we've been there, done that, and I will say this, people wrote me, Mark, you wouldn't believe how Canada's changed. Harper's destroying Canada. Nothing is farther from the truth. Canada's still the same as when I left it. You can't change Canada just through politics. You can't change it because you're the prime minister. Canadian people are still the same wonderful, decent people I have always known, and they're always going to be that way, and no politician is going to corrupt us to the degree where, Mark, Canada's changed. I used to get that. Canada has not changed. We will take back the government, and we will reassert our legitimate rights as Canadian people to justice and freedom and honor and stay out of wars. We're going to get all that back. He's not destroyed anything. Stephen Harper isn't nearly as powerful as he thinks he is. And it's up to us to remember that and to go to vote for a reason. We want to get rid of Stephen Harper, yes, but that's a negative reason. We want to legalize marijuana. That's a positive reason to get out and vote. We need those things because our people do not vote. So hating on Stephen Harper is not enough to get them to vote. This is their one chance in a lifetime to legalize marijuana through the ballot box and make October 19th a historical day this year. And as soon as that election's over and he does get his majority, we will insist the next day on a moratorium immediately to be placed that no one is to be arrested in Canada. If you're going to legalize it, Justin Trudeau, how can you arrest someone today, the day after your election, for a prosecution that will never come? So you should just tell your Attorney General, your new Attorney General, that there are to be no more marijuana prosecutions until you negotiate with the provinces a separation of responsibility.
You put me in the awkward journalistic position where now I'm supposed to defend Stephen Harper's sexual vigor and his social pleasantness. I don't think I'm intellectually capable of that.
Well, and Stephen Harper speaks for himself. If he were here, he'd say, well, why do you care? And that's a very good question. Why do I care? Because I want to vote for someone who's human like me, not an automaton. I see a lot more in common with Justin Trudeau than I do with Stephen Harper. And basically, that's what people are going to decide this election. Do you like this guy? And do you like this guy? And I think most people don't like Stephen Harper, and they feel uncomfortable with him, and they don't trust him, they don't feel good about him. And I think if you look at Justin Trudeau, you have every reason to give him one chance to do his thing and see how it works out. And I'm telling you, it's going to work out a lot better.
So we're way, way over time. So I'm just going to end with this. Is this still an issue that you're prepared to go to prison to fight for?
Oh, absolutely. But the great thing is it's unnecessary. It might be necessary. When I got back, I thought, man, everything's advanced in Vancouver. What can I do to be cutting edge, to keep my kind of historic? Because I said, I got 4 Lifetime Achievement Awards in the last 5 months. And I got the feeling that people were saying, now that you're retired, you have fun, right? And I'm thinking, I'm not retiring at all. So I'm dabbing all my customers. I'm getting everybody high who comes into my store. And as far as I can tell, I've been doing that for 8 weeks, and no one else on the planet is dabbing every single customer that comes in their store. With the promise that if you buy something like a bong or whatever, rolling papers, I will get you high. So again, I'm back upping the ante because that's new. I'm not sure that, people want that to spread. Should that be the kind of thing we see as a new retail strategy now? Person at the front door dabbing you as you go in. Oh, have a pleasant shopping experience. Get high. Okay, and then you go in, right? But for me, it's working. For me, it's working. I'm having lots of fun. I'm meeting people. People know I'm at my store from Monday to Saturday, noon to 6, getting you high. And people are coming by and being really great and saying, and I would say of the 1,500 people I've dabbed so far with these extracts, I would say at least 1,000 of them had never done it before. So I'm their first experience with this new wave in cannabis consumption, and I'm a great person to be with because I haven't had a negative anomaly in all those people, 1,500 people, not a single fainting, nothing going bad, everybody leaving energetic and happy, right? So it's a good experience for them. So when someone later says, have you ever done dabs, or do you know about dabs, they can say, yeah, I did one with Marc Emery, and it was nice. It was probably a lower dose than their friends might offer them, but it was a great way to bring them into it. And that's how I still regard my role as some kind of senior patriarch who is hopefully distributing wisdom and niceness and being a good representative for our movement and making sure that everybody has a pleasant experience as I convert them all, right, type of thing. So, and then they'll go away saying, well, so if they hear anything negative about dabs, because, 93% THC is a scary thing for the media, they just reported on it recently, and I'm sure some people are saying, oh, this isn't your father's shatter anymore, right? Not that there was shatter back then, but that kind of propaganda they do. And so no one else is doing that, so I feel I've got my spot. I'm cutting edge again, and that's really a great thing to know in a city of cutting edge, Vancouver.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Please give a round of applause for Marc. And if we can get the house lights on. So, Anna, how much time do we have for this? What's that? So we have about 15 minutes to half an hour for any of your questions. So please do keep your questions brief. And I'll just, I'm going to start going from right to left. So go ahead.
The Schedule 1 status of cannabis in both Canada and the United States is a big impediment to both legalization and medical research. What do you see in that changing? What do you think is happening?
Do you mind if I quickly, just for the recording's sake, I'm just going to repeat the questions really fast. So the question was about this marijuana's position on the Schedule 1 of banned substances, and and do you see a path for that changing? Is that right? Yeah.
For example, I think in both countries what's going to happen when marijuana is legalized, and this country sooner than America, is that it'll just be taken out of the schedule. I mean, Justin Trudeau can legalize marijuana by just saying, marijuana is no longer in the schedule. And that's actually the exact way it was put in. In 1923, the Minister of Health got up and said, marijuana has been added to the schedule, Mr. Speaker. And that was it. That's the whole debate about marijuana right there in one sentence. We added marijuana to the schedule, and we can legalize it by the exact same method. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister has instructed me to do as the Minister of Health, I have withdrawn marijuana from the schedule and is now free for the provinces to regulate and set up a regime as they see fit. And that's exactly what's going to happen, is we're going to have it like the liquor is sold in provinces with different regimes in different places, and we're going to see which province has the best regime. And they'll license the zoning for the retail outlets, how it's to be grown, and all these sort of things. And the Department of Agriculture, the local BC Ag here will get involved and all that sort of thing. And it'll have a bureaucracy and it'll have problems, but that's how a smart politician at the federal level would do it and say, listen, it's your thing now. I just legalize it, but you can regulate it and come up with whatever regime you want. And I'm pretty sure he's going to choose that one. Every other one is a quagmire. He could just simply say, I met my promise. I legalized marijuana. It's off the schedule. The provinces have 6 months to come up with a regime that will be instituted at the provincial level. In the United States, it's going to be more complicated, but the President of the United States can do the same thing, and I'm hoping Rand Paul gets elected president, because I believe he will reschedule it, at least to Schedule 2, but probably by 2016, there'll be 4 more states legalizing: California, Nevada, Massachusetts, and there's one other I've forgotten, Vermont. And once you've got that, the president's going to be under tremendous pressure to make a permanent decision. And if it's a Republican, I think it's more likely than Hillary Clinton to legalize marijuana by that method, removing it from the schedule and letting states regulate it.
I don't know if you're aware, but yesterday the American Association of Pediatrics...
Yeah, great decision. And for all the right reasons, for the medical benefits, but also because they said we don't want young people being stigmatized by criminal records. That's a tremendous statement. And of course, there's, like I say, we're a part of this intellectual wave that's going on right now, where doctors, psychiatrists, healthcare professionals, politicians, everybody's getting on board. And the great thing is they can go to Colorado and they can see that drunk driving is down 15% after a couple of years of legal marijuana. The results are in. There's no negative downsides to this. Colorado has much higher employment than other states. It's got a very vigorous retail market. People are moving to Colorado and they're willing to do anything, be janitor at McDonald's, just to live in Colorado so they can get legal weed. And you're going to see more of that. That's why they're going to have to legalize, because too many people are going to be emigrating to Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Colorado, and Washington, D.C. to get access to that. Because if I'm a young person, I have an option of living in Oklahoma or Colorado. The choice is clear. And I'm leaving Utah. I'm leaving Oklahoma.
Might have been
and I'm going to
anyway.
Colorado.
Okay, next question? Yeah. Oh, wait. Yeah, sure.
The first time that you dabbed, I assume, was probably when you first came back to Vancouver. What was that like? I've always wondered, your difference of thought.
I actually had some hurdles to overcome because I've been over-dabbed. One of the risks about being me is that I tend to go along with every joint offered to me, every brownie, every dab, and you're going to run into some people who didn't know what they were doing, right? So there's been about 6 or 7 times where I've gotten really, really sick by someone's toxic dab or brownies that had way too much hash in it, and I just got overtoxified. Now, in all medicine, the difference between death and medicine is dosage, right? A lot of people think to impress me, they should give me a high dose of something, right? But we don't think like that about anything else, right? Oh, you've got a headache here, take 20 aspirin, right? No. So that they don't do that. So that's what's happened to me. But you know what? I realize that there have been 3 significant things in the last 15 years in the industry. Heady glass, all this glass blowing that's been going on, never existed 20 years ago. Now it's everywhere and it's an art form, right? Vaporization is really new, from the volcano to all the pens to all those things. People are walking along the streets smoking. And then the other one is the concentrates, the new forms of hash, which we call shatter or wax or resins and these sort of things. So we've had these 3 great things in the last 15 years that have been an engine for billions and billions of dollars. So I think I should get familiar with them, right? So that's what I've really done. I've just brought myself up to speed. I enjoy taking cannabis in any form whatsoever, right? I like everything, joints. I'm still smoking joints. By the way, we brought lots of joints. So I'd like to meet you afterwards. After we get thrown out of here, we brought 27 joints, of which it's really organic blueberry Romulan and organic OG. So yeah, so that's out there. So I'm still very much in joint culture, shatter culture, dab culture, and I'm still very excited about it. I definitely think there's amateur-made dabs. Like, people bring me their stuff, right? And they'll all concede, I don't have a proper vacuum oven yet, but it's pretty good up to that point, right? And it's got impurities in it and stuff like that. So I'm meeting everybody, and people are very excited about this. And also, when I ask people, have you ever dabbed before? And like I say, over 1,000 of the 1,500 people I've encountered have not. They're not frightened of it. They're curious, a little nervous maybe that something negative will happen. So it's really awesome that they're encountering me, and I can say, no, I'm never going to give you a dosage that's going to create a negative anomaly in how you're feeling, right? And then, but if you do like it, you'll welcome it at some future time when you have an opportunity to buy it or use it or control it and stuff like that. This is just to give you an idea that this is nothing you should be frightened of in case you see media that says 93% THC or something like that, right?
So maybe we'll just do 2 more questions, and then, as Marc says, there's a very unique breakout session afterwards, so you can ask him. Yeah, go ahead.
Heard that you had applied for clemency and Harper turned you down. Can you tell me a little bit?
It wasn't clemency.
Oh, sorry, I'm just going to repeat that. So the question asker said that he heard that you had applied for clemency and that Harper turned you down, and he just wanted a clarification.
I'd have to apply to the President of the United States for clemency, and as it turns out, non-Americans can't even apply for pardons or clemency. I applied for a treaty transfer back to Canadian prison, where Jody could visit me much more readily and stuff. And that was done a year earlier, and the Conservative government just never did anything about it, and they just let it lapse. So they got up in Parliament 5 times to denounce me or my wife Jody or both of us. A separate Conservative member of Parliament would get up and actually say, like, these are the kind of people we don't want in Canada, right? And say negative things about me. And so basically they were even using me to score political points. But under the Liberals and the previous governments, all Canadian prisoners abroad are entitled to be transferred back to Canada to serve their sentence out. And that's a bilateral treaty that Canada has with so many countries, including the United States, but it's been gutted under Harper. Harper doesn't want to take anybody back. And so he thinks, no, you languish in some American prison for 2 reasons. For one, it's more punishment. Secondly, they're paying for it, not us. And so that's what he did with us. He demonized us, had his minions get up in Parliament and say bad things about Jody and I, and refused to transfer me back like he's obligated under the treaty. And that's what happened. He discriminated against me simply for who I was, but that just meant I spent my entire time in the United States, and I would have come back about a year earlier if I'd have spent that time in a Canadian prison.
So one last question. Who's got one? Yeah, way up there.
Marc, so given how provocative of an advocate you are, and Jody's refusal by the Liberal Party to run for Vancouver East, I'm imagining you're not going to be standing at a podium with Justin Trudeau over the next year.
Oh, if he'd have me, for sure I would.
The point is, I just want to ask a really actionable question. Me as a young person looking to push and campaign for change in this election, do you think it's more useful to rally around the legalized cause or to rally around the Liberals and hopefully shift some of that NDP vote towards the Liberals?
So I'll just repeat that. So it's a person asking, as a young person, do you think it's more beneficial for them to rally around the entire Liberal platform, or to push for liberalization independent of the Liberal Party? Did I understand that?
Yeah, like follow you or follow Justin?
Follow. Yeah. So should he be following you, Marc, or following Justin Trudeau?
Well, you should just make a good educated decision that voting for legalization is in our interests. And there's only one party that's going to form the next government. In fairness to the Greens, they also favor legalization. But there's no way they're going to form the next government and there's likely they're not even going to have more than one member of parliament. Though I love Elizabeth May and she's been awesome. And I have nothing but, I love Libby Davies too. Those are my two favorite members of parliament, neither of whom are Liberals. But no NDP candidate in the next year is going to use the word legalization. This is a terrible abandonment of their position to us all these years. A lot of us have supported the NDP. Jack Layton came to my home, made this great video saying he wanted to legalize marijuana, but then he never really did anything with it. He said that, but then he never advocated publicly. He never told the caucus never introduced any motions to it. And we have been lied to a lot. But I think there's every reason to believe the Liberals are sincere, because every candidate's favoring legalization. The leader is sincere. He has no reason not to. He staked a lot on this. Justin Trudeau is hoping a lot of young people vote for him. And if they do, they're going to be expecting something, and they're going to hold him accountable. And I'm going to hold him accountable. There's a lot of a relationship we could have with the Liberals in the next government if they decide to legalize marijuana. I would say, if I were you, I would join the campaign of a Liberal candidate, and just be there enough that you let them know that you're there because you believe in legalizing marijuana, and that's why you're there. That's going to go a long way. If they get volunteers to their campaign who are there specifically, either because I asked them to, or because you believe in legalization, you want to help that candidate get elected, they're going to remember that. Remember, there's another 9 months to that election. So there's a long time for these people to get to know their supporters and know the people helping them out. And what's really important is most young people don't even not vote, but very few get involved in political campaigns anymore. Far fewer than when I was young, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's really vitally important to get past your cynicism that it doesn't matter, because you can have a big influence on just how that candidate feels. And if he gets elected and you were around enough to give a few sensible explanations about why, if pot were legal, things would be way better for a lot of people, everybody, then he's going to remember those things. It's going to be meaningful to him. Remember, all politics is relationships. And if we don't bother to get these relationships and have these relationships, we can't be expected to be players. We can't expect to be called to the table. You know, we have to be able to bring our 1 million to 3 million people to a vote and have them show up and vote. And then politicians will treat us with respect, and they will deal with our issues. But if we don't vote, if we're cynical, if we say, oh, they're all liars and they're all cheats and stuff like that, then we marginalize ourselves, and that's disastrous public policy, because we can't get anything if we do that. We have to be engaged in politics. We need to get past our cynicism and keep going. So Jody, rather than being bitter when the Liberals didn't allow her to run, said, no problem, I'm still campaigning for the Liberals, and I'm going to be there in 4 years. I mean, the reason they didn't give her the vote is because we actually had sold enough membership she would have won. So at that point, they say, okay, we're not letting you win, right? But she would have won. And a lot of people kind of know that, and they've got two very droll candidates that are totally, really unsuited to win the riding. They might be nice enough people, but they're not going to win the riding. Jody actually had a fighting chance of doing well in that riding now that Libby Davies. In fact, the only person Libby Davies has spoken nice of any rivals, she's always said, I support Jody. Jody's awesome. You know, Marc and Jody are good people. She never said, I endorse Jenny Kwan or all these other people. She's since said, like, Jody's a really good person without having to say that she endorsed her for politics. So, you know, Jody has a lot of gravitas in the political realm, and it's just not her chance to use it. But that's fine by her. We want to get the Liberals elected and then worry about future elections at some other time. It's not really about us. It's about all of us engaging with the political establishment and making our voices heard. And to me, for a young person, join a political campaign. What riding do you live in? Great. She would love the help. She's in favor of legalization, and she knows the arguments, but she could use the people on her campaign just to keep her, you know, aware that there's more arguments and that we are willing to show up and pay our dues politically to help her get reelected, to bring that to happen in Parliament. And that's what every young person needs to do. Just get involved in a campaign. You'll be surprised how influential you can be.
And I think that is an excellent place to leave it. So give another round of applause for Marc. Thanks, Marc. That was fun.
Yeah.